Good morning again. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you to this fourth and last edition in our row of webinar series on the topics related to wearable robots. So the specific topic of this edition, as you can see on the screen, is standardization and benchmarking. My name is Jan Veneman, and I was sharing a so-called cost action on wearable robots. And COST stands for Collaboration in Science and Technology. And this is a program funded by the European Union, fostering research collaboration across Europe. Normally, the COST action would organize such activities in person, expert meetings and workshops, exchanges of researchers, training schools, etc. But as you can understand, and due to the COVID restrictions, this has been difficult last year, and I'm very happy that we organized this summer series of webinars as a kind of replacement activity also for the COST. Actually, the COST action ended this year, 14th of September. But of course, we are contributing to this final edition of the webinar as well. And yeah, welcome to everyone, but especially to COST members as well. Also, maybe good to say that we aim to create follow-up COST activity, but this is to be seen in the future. Also, I'm very happy that we can do this in collaboration with the EUROBENCH Consortium, coordinated by Diego Torricelli, the CSIC, who also will say a few things after me, and also the support of INCOM through the EUROBENCH Consortium, who greatly supported in setting up and organizing these webinars. So the COST action itself addresses a wide range of topics related to wearable robots, such as underlying science, key technologies and tools, analysis of application domains and important characteristics per domain, and also aspects such as ethical, legal and societal aspects of wearable robots, and also educational challenges. So all these topics were also considered in the working groups of the action, but also reflected in the topics of the webinar series. And yeah, I wanted to say that from COST side, it's a very nice match, and we're happy to see this wide range of topics covered in the webinars. Now I would like to leave it with that. If you're interested in the COST action and possible follow-up actions, please check our website, and you can find the links in the invitation of this webinar. And with that, I would like to give the word to Diego.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you everybody for coming here, and also and all the speakers of today. As Jan said, this is the fourth webinar. We have done other three: one on educational exoskeleton, another one on occupational exoskeleton, another one on medical systems, and this last edition is about standardization and benchmarking. It's I think one of the most important one, because in one of the missions in COST and also in the EUROBENCH project is to try to provide tools for companies and to researchers to bring their prototypes and product to the market. And this is the very last step. When you have a prototype, then you have to comply with the regulations, to demonstrate, to allow the user to compare your product with others. And that's why standardization and benchmarking are two very important tools. And today we have 5 speakers with talk about these topics, very different ones. There are representatives from companies like Anna from Able. There is Gerdienke from another European project, which is called COVR, which is also very much focused on standardization. We have also legal experts like Eduard and Carlos that will talk also about all the implication from the regulatory perspective. And we also have Alfonso that will talk about some efforts in the EUROBENCH project about how to standardize the software, how to allow people to put together the efforts in the research community, in terms of methods for assessment and for benchmarking. Since we have so many speakers, I will not introduce much more. I would just say that there will be 4 presentations. One will be a tandem talk, 15 minutes. We have to stick to this time. Please, all the attendees, write your questions in the chat, because then we will look at them, and at the end, Jan Beneman will moderate the final roundtable among all the speakers. Okay, so let's start, and it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Gerdienke Pranke, which is from Rosin Research and Development, which is an institution in the Netherlands, which is focused on analysis of motion in different kind of patients and healthy subjects, and in particular, she has been leading part of the COVR project, on which some of us have been involved. Which is focused on safety and on regulation. Please, Gerdienke.
Thank you, Diego, and thank you for inviting me for this webinar. I'm glad to have the opportunity to share some of the work that we've been doing in the COVR project. And like we already found out during the course of the projects, COVR and EUROBENCH share well, some common ground. So I think it's nice to connect that together. Just a few quick words on my part. I'm Gerdienke Pranke. I'm a human movement scientist by background, and like Diego said, I work at Rosin Research and Development, RRD, where we do a lot of applied research with rehabilitation technology, so amongst others robotics. So that's where a lot of our experience comes from. That helps us make the COVR project more concrete on the rehab side. So to start off, a little bit of the background that's probably not unfamiliar to the audience here, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But there's, with the increasing need that we have and the deployment of assistive and rehabilitation robotics, there's also currently going on an increasing awareness of safety challenges. And I think it's clear that there are some inherent safety issues, especially when you consider the close physical interaction of a patient or a user of a rehabilitation robot with the robot, obviously, and also the vulnerability of the users that are involved. So that makes it a slightly bit different than other types of collaborative robots, what the topic of the COVR project is. That's cross-domain. So if you consider collaborative robots in a factory environment, for instance, that's quite different in many cases than you would have with a rehab robot. So that presents some challenges on the rehab robot side, where you will have continuous physical contact, so it's not incidental, it's for prolonged, and it's intended. There's often more than one user. The environment is rather uncontrolled. The user itself is, well, let's call it less predictable. If you have a patient that presents with different motor symptoms than a healthy person would, or even different sensory aspects are involved, that might affect the use and the safety of the user. And of course, there's a very large diversity of device types itself. And there's also some challenges on the regulatory side, where in this field, the applicability of standards is rather restricted and complex. There's a lack of recommendations for safety testing currently. And at the same time, there's an increasing focus on safety in regulations like the medical device regulation. So that presents some an interesting field with a lot of challenges to overcome for robot developers in this area. So the COVR project is trying to facilitate this process by facilitating and supporting safety assessment of collaborative robots. And like I just said, that's collaborative robots cross-domain. So that is also about manufacturing, logistics, agriculture, all different types of domains, but also healthcare. And it is a project that is led by the Danish Technological Institute from Denmark and has 4 other partners working together with them on the project. So that's Fraunhofer in Germany, IFF department, CEA List from Paris, and there's CNR from Milan, and us from Enschede. And the way we try to do that within the COVR project is to provide information for cobot developers. So we do that in 3 ways: by first having an online decision tree and safety test protocols available for anyone that's interested in it. There are safety hubs for expertise and testing. So that's actual facilities that robot developers can go to. And there's third-party funding for cobot safety projects that has been given out during the course of the COVR project. The COVR project is now in the final stages. It ends at the end of the year. So the third-party funding has been spent already on a lot of interesting projects that are going on in that regard. But first, to start at the beginning, just consider a cobot, so a collaborative robot, and you imagine it is somewhere in a factory. So then a lot of these directives apply, and a lot of standards can be applied as well to this cobot. But if you have a medical purpose to it, it becomes even more complex. So you don't have multiple directives, but you have even more directives and regulations that are valid. And you have a lot of standards that can be applicable to your cobot device that you could use. So that makes it very uncomplex and not very complex and not really clear where you can find which information and how that all matches together. So if you consider the idea when you develop a cobot from idea to product, then there are basically two stages in this whole process where this information, these regulatory sides come into play, and that's at the start during the initial phases of idea creation and the design, and then towards the end of the product development process with the verification and validation, where you will actually start testing. So in the first stage, you will need information and education mostly. And towards the end, it becomes more concrete with needing guidance on how to actually perform these safety tests. That's where COVR tries to provide some information. So this is a screenshot of the toolkit that's available online through the COVR toolkit that I showed on a slide earlier, safearoundrobots.com. And you will find here a lot of information. So, for instance, the directives and standards. You can filter based on the type of domain you're interested in and what the robot system looks like. So you can click and play with the selections there. And then it will spit out a list of directives and regulations that are likely applicable to your device. In terms of the directives and the regulations, they're freely accessible, of course. So that's a direct link to that directive or regulation. And you could also get a list of standards that is possibly applicable to your system. And of course, these are not freely accessible. So it links to it shows what standard it is and where you could find it. But of course, it doesn't provide the standard itself. Unfortunately, that's not possible. But you can find a complete list of standards that might be interesting for your device to use. The next page is about the protocols. So here you have, again, you can make a selection. Now, not the domain and the robot type, but the robot type itself. So what does the system look like? And what are the features that you wish to test? So this is domain, not domain specific. So you can, let's have an example that makes more sense to this audience, where you have an exoskeleton and you want to maintain proper alignment. So if you put in these selections, you get a list of protocols that are applicable. In this case, there's only one in green. So that's the protocol available to test exoskeleton for maintaining proper alignment for hinge type joints. So it gives a short description and you can download directly this protocol. And just to give you an example of what we mean by protocol and what it is, I've put a few screenshots here. This is the particular protocol on maintaining proper alignment, where you get, of course, a description of the protocol itself and an introduction of, describing the context for the test protocol. But it also gives you very detailed information about how to test. So which sensing devices to use, what should you think about in terms of the data that you need to collect, and a step-by-step recipe basically to guide you through the testing. What do you need to do at what stage, and how to which data to use for the analysis of this particular test. So that's done for a lot of these different protocols that you can find in the toolkit for you to look at. There's, in terms of information and education, also a lot of other information, like information about the risk assessment, test equipment for these safety features that's available at the different cover partners. And a list of publications, for instance. So a lot of pages with information that people can use when they see that fit. And another one source of information is the case stories. Here we have examples, real examples of coming from a lot of the third-party funding projects, where people shared what lessons they learned, what type of information they found really valuable that they learned during the project. So this can present as some kind of inspiration for robot developers on how others have dealt with a particular challenge. So we hope that this gives some more information and some more direction for people searching for information. So that's a little bit on what the cover toolkit can provide. And like you could see, here are a number of healthcare examples. Of course, there are a lot of other examples from other domains as well. But it's also clear during the process of the cover project that the healthcare domain is the domain where a lot of information is also still missing. So there are a lot of safety challenges out there still that's really not that clear on how to address those. So there's a lot of research work to be done as well. So we have one PhD student at RID, Jule Besle. She's doing research on this particular topic. So I want to highlight a few of the things she did, just to give you some idea of gaps that are still there and ways that we are trying to address those. So she started off with a systematic literature review to find out what actually the most pressing safety issues are at the moment. We looked, in this case, at stationary robotic gait training applications, and we looked at adverse events occurrence. So went through a list of studies that are about stationary robotic gait training and checked how many of those reported adverse events, how they reported it, what they reported, what the adverse events were, these kind of things. So in the end, we included 50 studies that involved in total 985 subjects. And adverse events were reported in 18 of those 50 studies. And about 170 device-related adverse events were reported. And they affected between 79 and 124 patients. So that's 8 to 13% of the patients involved. And that averages to 17 adverse events per 100 subjects. You will probably be wondering, why is it between this and this number? Well, you can see that the number of device-related adverse events is larger than the number of patients involved, but it's not always clear how many adverse events that are reported are attributable to one patient or more than one patient. So if you have 4 device-related adverse events reported in one study, it's not always clear if that's 4 different patients or it all happened in one patient. So it's a bit hard sometimes to count exactly how many patients it involves. But this is the summary of it. And then it's of course interesting to see where do these adverse events occur, what happens. So we first looked at the frequency. The most frequent adverse events happen that are reported are soft tissue related injuries. So that's talking about skin reddening, skin lesions, skin abrasions, bruises, these kind of things. And overall, we saw that it occurred more often or at least was reported more often in end-effector type devices. And the second most frequent one was musculoskeletal injuries. So then you're talking about joint pain, muscle pain. In one case, we saw a bone fracture. So these kind of things. And we saw that occurred mostly in exoskeleton type devices. So that gives us some insight in what happens. In the next step, we also looked at the assumed causes of those. Oh, wait, yeah, first the severity. I'm going too fast. Of course, you also want to see not how often they occur, but also how severe it is, of course. That's very relevant. So we listed the severity, and then the most severe adverse events happening is physiological injuries. They don't happen a lot, you can see in the graph here. But when they happen, they have quite a moderate to severe consequence, in the sense that often deals with changes in blood pressure. And then that has the consequence almost always that you need to stop the training session or to stop the treatment that you're doing because the person is becoming unwell. Then the second most severe adverse events is soft tissue related injuries, and the third is in terms of severity is the musculoskeletal injuries. And what's important to note is that there you need to have specific attention when you're dealing with patients, because there can be in those cases that there can be restricted blood flow or other comorbidities, because then soft tissue injuries can lead to more serious complication or require medical attention. So it's always an interplay between factors. So that's something to keep an eye out on. And then looking at combining all this information that we found in these studies that was reported, we try to highlight or to identify the assumed causes and risk factors that might contribute to that. And in summary, it all comes down to basically two aspects. That's forces in the skin-robot interface and forces in on the musculoskeletal level. And of course, all these things are influenced by different aspects, such as the subject characteristics, the materials present at the interface, the fit and the compliance of the device, and of course the amount of misalignment that's occurring. So these are important issues, important aspects to be aware of and actually to get more information on. Because if you dig a little bit deeper into that, it's also clear that there are major gaps still in that area in terms of rehab robotics. So there's actually a need for reliable measurement methods of these two aspects. And also, if you even have a way to measure it, there's really not much information out there on acceptable limit values for these interaction forces. So it's not really known at what you shouldn't go over a certain limit, because then you do damage to the human system. That's really not known for the specific type of interaction that you have in a rehab robot situation. So there's a lot of work to do there. Jule is trying to do part of it. So just some ideas on how we are looking into this is looking at trying to find ways to measure the forces at the skin-robot interface, and not only pressure, but especially shear. And that's we found that's still a bit of a challenge. Forces on musculoskeletal level, you basically need a dummy limb for that. So here we have a dummy leg setup that we've been researching with. And also to get a first insight in acceptable limit values for pressure and shear, we're planning a study to look into that a bit more. But that's all work in progress, and we know that there's other groups also working on these kind of issues, and I think that's a big step that needs to be taken now to advance this part in the field of rehab robotics. So coming back to the COVR project, like I said, it's nearly at the end of the runtime of the project, but of course we want to keep this information available after the end of the project. So that's why we are trying to establish more of these safety hubs, more of these testing facilities, to build a sustained community. So we want to see and try if we can build a network of safety hubs across Europe, where you can find the best practice, where you can go for having your robot tested. So we're currently in the process of finding organizations and companies that are interested in becoming a COVR hub. So if you're interested in that, you can look at the COVR website or drop me a note, and we can talk more about that. And in the meantime, we hope that we can get a network established so that you will have a bigger geographical spread of these testing facilities that might be of help for your robot development. So with that, I want to thank you for this opportunity and your attention.
Thank you very much, Gerdienke. There are already a couple of questions for you, but we will take with them at the end during the roundtable. So okay, we go straight one presentation after the other. So thank you very much. Great. And let me introduce you to the next speaker, which is Anna Mas-Vinyard. She's working with the company Able Human Motion. They are developing different version of an exoskeleton for lower limb. And Anna is a bioengineer. She has a PhD in bioengineering, and she is working in EBO on the quality assurance and regulatory topics, which is, I would say, I'm glad that there are companies in which there are people completely dedicated to this, because it's it's a very big effort to bring these prototypes into the market and cope with all this regulation you have seen in the previous presentation. There are a lot of standards and regulatory aspects to take into account. And Anna will tell us about the major challenges of this process. Thank you, Anna.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. Well, as Diego said, today I would like to share with all of you our experience with the certification of our exoskeleton, the able exoskeleton, under the new medical device regulation. And well, as already Diego mentioned, I'm leading all the quality and regulatory activities at the company. First, let me give you a very brief introduction about ABLE. ABLE Human Motion is a startup that was born in Barcelona in 2018 as a spin-off of the Research Center in Bioengineering of the UPC University. And well, our mission is to be able to enable mobility to everyone through the development of easy-to-use and affordable technology. And our first product is the ABLE exoskeleton, which has been specifically conceived for people with a spinal cord injury. And our value proposition with this exo is that it's lightweight, easy to use, and accessible. So we aim to enable the continuum of care from the hospital to the patient's home. And here I hope you see the video. Yes, you can see a complete paraplegic individual, Ricard, using our ABLE exoskeleton. And as you can see, he can use the device autonomously without the need of help or supervision. Okay, so in the last 2 years, we've done a lot of things, but let me highlight the most important. We have patented our technology, and we have tested the exo with a lot of patients, now with more than 70 paraplegic individuals. Now we are finishing a multicentric clinical investigation in Institut Guttmann in Barcelona and at Heidelberg University Hospital in Germany. And we have also implemented and certified our quality management system according to this ISO 13485, which is a requirement for medical device manufacturers. So let's go into more detail about the regulatory framework for rehabilitation robots. I will try to highlight like the main points that surround the MDR regulation. But well, it's a lot of information, so if you have further questions, we can discuss them later, or you can send me an email. So first, it's important to have in mind that every robot with a medical purpose fits into the definition of a medical device, and so it needs to be compliant with this newly released regulation, which became fully applicable this past month of May. And with its application, the directives that were before in place are no longer applicable. But what's the MDR and which are the main points of the regulation? I would say that the keystone of this regulation is that it uses a risk-based life cycle approach. And this means that we as a medical device manufacturers need to be able to demonstrate safety and performance during the entire life cycle of the medical device, from its conceptualization to the design, validation, and during the post-market activities. So we need to be constantly reevaluating risk and assessing the safety and that the device performs as intended. And also, the MDR is important to take into account that emphasizes a lot about the need of having clinical data to support this this safety and performance demonstration. And we will talk more in detail later about if we need or not to perform clinical investigations. And then just to I don't know the background of all the assistants, but medical device regulation and the past directives classify the medical devices according their risk. So here you can see that there are 4 main classes, and the MDR presents a list of rules that enable you to classify your specific device into one of these categories. And depending on the category that your device falls, you will need to go through a regulatory pathway or through another. So how do exoskeletons fit with this MDR? Well, if we have an exoskeleton with a medical purpose, it's obviously a medical device. So exoskeletons for rehabilitation, for example, for spinal cord injury or stroke, are definitely medical devices and they need to comply with the MDR. And how are they classified under the MDR? Okay, so remember these 4 main classes. So most likely, electrically powered exoskeleton will be classified as class 2A, as it meets the rule 9 of classification, which is defined in the MDR. So they are non-invasive devices which are active because they administer and exchange energy with the human body. So what do we need to do to be able to sell our exoskeleton to the European market? Okay, what we need is to have this CE mark. And to do so, as a medical device manufacturer, it's important to focus on these 2 main blocks, which would be our product and having a quality management system in place. So the medical device regulation mandates that all medical device manufacturers have a quality management system in place, complying with a list of requirements. And to comply with the requirements, we should be compliant with this ISO 13485. And it's important to note that having this QMS will enable us to develop all the activities that are in the life cycle of our product in a systematic way, and also to be able to document them, because it's important to have in mind that if something is not documented, it didn't happen, and we need to keep track of everything that relates to our product and its use. And besides having this QMS in place, we also need to focus on our product and on preparing its technical documentation. And the contents of the technical documentation will depend on the classification of our product according to the risk. But we've said that most likely exoskeletons will fit into the class 2A. And some of the contents of the technical documentation would be the ones that you can see here in the slide. There's a lot more, but I haven't included all. We need to provide information about on how we do the risk assessment for our device. We need to present what's called the design history file of the device. That this means information from the user requirements to the outputs, the technical outputs that we have specifically designed to meet these technical requirements. And it's important to see the relation between having this documentation and a QMS, because having a QMS will actually enable us to have all the technical documentation in place. And also, very important, and I will focus my presentation on these main things, is to demonstrate the safety and performance of our device. And to do so, we need to focus on the two V's, which are verification and validation activities that we will try to do according a set of standards and other practices that we will discuss later. Once we have our technical documentation and our QMS in place, we can ask the notified body to do the audit and decide whether or not we can have the CE mark, and then we will, as a company, we will draft the declaration of conformity and be able to sell our device to the market. So as I said, I'd like to focus on how do we demonstrate safety and performance under the MDR. This regulation details a list of safety and performance requirements in its Annex 1 that we, as a medical device manufacturer, needs to justify whether if they apply or not to our device. And in the case that they are applicable, we will need to demonstrate how we are compliant with those. And to demonstrate this compliance, we use verification and validation activities. When talking about verification, it means all the preclinical testing activities that we do without involving human subjects. And these testing activities, they are performed following the guidance of standards, which can be harmonized, and that a standard is harmonized means that it can be used to demonstrate compliance with the regulation. So we have these standards to demonstrate that our device performs as intended, and also best practices or our own testing protocols that are designed by ourselves. And then regarding validation activities usually involve human subjects. And here we have, for example, usability studies and all the clinical evaluation of our product. And the MDR especially requires to have clinical data to support the safety and performance of a device. And this clinical data can come from our own medical device or from an equivalent device. And later on, we will talk a little bit more about how to demonstrate equivalence. And well, if we aim to include clinical data from our own device, we will for sure need to perform clinical investigations, which are also subject to some regulations. Okay, so let's start with verification activities and all the preclinical testing. As I said, what would be the best strategy is to be able to rely on harmonized standards to demonstrate compliance. But unfortunately, with the MDR, as it's it's quite new, the harmonization of the standards has been delayed, and there are very few. But we expect that in the following months, some other standards will be harmonized, and we will be able to use them to demonstrate compliance. And here in these 4 boxes, I have included the main standards that relate with exoskeletons. In this case, we have the family of electrical safety and electromagnetic compatibility standards, which is the 60601. And this is a big family of standards, and for each specific device, you need to check whether or not a particular standard applies. Then we also have this standard newly released from 2020, I believe, for medical robots for rehabilitation, which is essentially a modification of the previous one and adds specific considerations for robots for rehabilitation. We also need to consider standards regarding biocompatibility, and of course, if our device incorporates software, this software needs to be developed according a specific regulation. But what happens here? We as manufacturers, as Gerdienke also mentioned, find that there's a lack of standards and normalized practices specific for exoskeletons. And if we want to evaluate the mechanical safety without involving human subjects, this is very difficult. And there's the need to research more and evaluate more the human and robot interaction, which is a very complicated process. So this is why initiatives such as EUROBENCH and COVR are so valuable for us as manufacturers, to be able to transform these standard protocols into international standards that can be used to demonstrate compliance with the regulations. So here, I don't know if they will share the slides, but here's a list, a more complete list of standards that would be applicable for a lower limb or an upper limb exoskeleton, robotic exoskeleton. Okay, so after having verified our exoskeleton without a human subject, then the next step to demonstrate safety and performance would be to validate our product. And this validation usually involves clinical investigations and usability studies. So as I already mentioned, the MDR requires the manufacturer to present clinical data to support the safety of the device. And this clinical data can be from our device or from an equivalent device. But what happens with equivalence, and how do we know if we need to perform a clinical investigation? Well, with the directives, the demonstration of equivalence was easier than with the MDR, because under the MDR, in order to be able to demonstrate that your device is equivalent to another one, it must be technically, biologically, and clinically equivalent at the same time. And also, you need to be able to provide proof of this equivalence. So if you don't have access to the technical documentation, verification procedures of the other device, it's very difficult. So I would say that if you are wondering if you are developing an exoskeleton and if you wonder if you will need to do a clinical investigation, I would say that most likely, yes, you will need to do it. And clinical investigations at the same time need to comply with a set of requirements that they are detailed in the MDR. And also they have specific standards, such as the ISO 14155, and they will obviously need to be conducted according to good clinical practices. And all these requirements are mandatory if you want to use this clinical investigation and the data that you produce with the investigation for the certification of your device. If the clinical investigation is not conducted according to this guidance, then you won't be able to present this information to the notified body because they won't accept it. And also it's important to note that there are specific national requirements. So if you are planning to do a clinical investigation in more than one country, you will need to make sure that you know all the specific requirements. For example, when we planned the multicentric clinical investigation in Spain and Germany, we found out that procedures with competent authorities were slightly different. And well, to almost end my presentation here, I would like to highlight the importance of starting regulatory activities, which are highlighted in green, from the early beginning of our project. So when we are conceptualizing a medical device that we want to produce, it's very important to start thinking about which regulations this medical device will be subject, because a decision in that stage can have a huge impact later on and can be a bottleneck to keep going towards the market. And as as you can see, and again, the MDR really focuses on this life cycle and keep evaluating and reevaluating risk during the entire procedure. So now to finish, I would like to share with you some challenges and tips about things that we have encountered, and I would like to have heard when I was starting with the certification of our exoskeleton. So first, and Diego also mentioned that when he was presenting my contribution, it's very important to have at least one full-time worker dedicated to quality and regulatory activities. There's a lot of work to do. And of course, you can seek for advice of experienced consultants, and this will definitely help. But I would recommend that you bring the expertise from the inside of your team. And with this being said, I think that what's most important is to achieve the R&D team engagement, because sometimes regulatory activities, well, sometimes almost always, are seen like these mandatory and boring tasks that we need to do to bring our device to the market. But in the end, the R&D team are the experts of your product, and they are the ones building it. So they are the ones that know the best how to verify and validate your product. So I would say that it's important to involve them since the very beginning. Also, a huge challenge, and if you are a startup, it's even bigger. It's to implement a QMS, a quality management system, from scratch. So don't wait too much to start. If you have an idea, you have a prototype, and you are certain that you would like to bring this product to the market, start with the implementation of your QMS. And again, you can seek for advice, but it's important that you write your own procedures. You are the expert, and you are the one that know the best your company and your product. So get involved and don't let others do your job. And also, I would like to highlight that it's important to, when you are thinking about the design inputs to meet a certain user requirements and verification activities, it's important that you start thinking about the regulatory requirements. Because, for example, selecting one battery or another can have a huge impact on which regulations you need to comply. And also, clinical evidence, as the MDR emphasizes a lot on clinical data, it's important that you know if you will need to gather your own clinical evidence or if you will be able to demonstrate equivalence, for example. And it's important that you have in mind which evidence will you need. And regarding clinical investigations, if you need them, plan them in advance. They are the approval process is long. It's time consuming. You need to prepare a lot of documentation and do a lot of testing before conducting a clinical investigation. So think about it early in the project, and also try to do it with the most final version of your device to be able to use these clinical investigations for your certification. And just to end, quality and regulatory activities are very expensive and way more expensive than you can imagine. So at the beginning of the project, take them into account and well, try to do the numbers to determine your financial needs, including these quality and regulatory activities. So thank you very much, all of you, for listening. And well, I'm looking forward to the discussion later. And if you have any questions or want to discuss something in more detail, you can always send me an email and I'll be happy to help.
Thank you very much, Anna, for the very clear and very, I would say, you touched a lot of very interesting points. you can see in the question there are many of them already for you. So be prepared.
Great.
Because we are all very interested in your experience. And so let me introduce the next two speakers. The next will be a tandem talk from Eduard Fosch-Villaronga and Carlos Calleja. They are both working together in the Leiden University in the Netherlands. They are very much focused on the legal aspect of robotics, of collaborative robots, and they are involved in several European projects like the COVR project, also the EUROBENCH project, in order to try to help engineers and companies, give them a support from the legal side to see how they can take into account all these difficult aspects, no? And also how to influence the policymakers. So please, I think Carlos will start, or Eduard, I don't know.
Yeah, we will go both, but I wanted to say already that, Anna, this was a really great presentation, and I think that your lesson learned experience very much would help a lot. If we could gather these experiences, we could identify which are the parts that can be streamlined, no? Because it seems that it's very lengthy and very complex way to navigate, and yeah. So good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for letting us the opportunity to be here today and to join the webinar. Our presentation is on the potential use of experimentation and test beds to improve the regulatory framing of emerging technologies. And I am Eduard Fosch-Villaronga, and I work, as Diego said, at the ILO Center for Law and Digital Technologies at Leiden University. And my work revolves around understanding the legal and regulatory implications of the use of robots for society. And we work together with Carlos in this project. Oh, Carlos? Oh, Carlos, you're muted. Oh, sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now.
Good. Sorry, I apologize. So I'm Carlos Calleja. I'm also a researcher at the ILO Center for Law and Digital Technologies at Leiden University. I'm also working with Propelling, and I've been also working for a while with robotics and AI and how to properly frame these technologies and how to improve policy making.
So today we kick off this presentation with some of the difficulties in regulating emerging robotics. And in this presentation, we will try to answer the question of why robot regulation needs optimization and why this matters to you. We will present our ideas on the potential of using testing zones for robot technologies as a tool for optimizing and ameliorating current standards. We will introduce Propelling, which is the project with whom we are working on the EUROBENCH consortium, in which we aim to tackling some of these difficulties. And we'll see the project model and its goals and introduce some of the challenges that we already have identified in the project. And then we will close this talk by welcoming you to join us in our journey and in using science for robot policies, because we very much believe that will be very useful also in the future for others.
Yes. So why robot regulation needs optimization? And I think that the best way of tackling this question is starting with, but what's regulation, or what's the law of the robot? So many people imagine the law of the robot like this. So everyone knows Isaac Asimov's work. So many people imagine the law of the robot with three simple rules. So no robot can cause or lead to the cause of an injury. Second rule, a robot must obey the orders unless they collide with the first rule. Or the third rule, a robot may protect its own existence unless it collides with both of the previous rules. But that's pretty much science fiction, because in reality, the regulation for robots is way more complex. So if we have a medical device, we will have to factor in the medical devices regulation. But if the device also is a machinery equipment, so we must also factor the machinery directive. And we may also consider the radio equipment directive. We have also the cybersecurity directive for interconnected devices. If we have a device to process personal data, we'll also have to factor in the GDPR. And certainly we'll have to factor in the General Product Safety Directive. So in a nutshell, far from the three very settled rules, it seems we have a very complex environment. And one feature of that environment is that it works with co-regulation. So it's not only the legal rules set very, very broad standards, but when it comes to the specificities, we also need to factor in several technical standards and ethical guidelines. So the ISO 13482 is one of them, but we also have the IEC standard on medical electrical equipment, and we have to factor in the recommended practices for assessing the impact of autonomous and intelligent systems. And well, when it comes to ethics, we also have to factor in the ethic guidelines, and we also have the ethically aligned design. So in a nutshell, we have a very, very complex landscape, which is populated by a myriad of fragmented regulation, abstract code of conduct, and ethical guidelines. And that creates a difficulty in translating, or there's a difficulty in translating those standards into very concrete codes of conduct and development decisions. But we also have a problem that regulation often fails to frame technology accurately. So normally it's well documented that it's hard to determine where a specific development fits. And robot developers, on the other hand, struggle to incorporate other aspects than mere physical safety into robot design and to make them comprehensively safe. And another aspect which is key for robots is that the testing methods has not been implemented nor evaluated broadly. So we have robots raising unprecedented legal and ethical questions, but it's very hard to incorporate them into design decisions and into risk assessments. So, when it comes to unlocking the potential of testing, now it's time to follow to talk about the potential of experimentation.
Yeah, sorry, because I cannot see the slides at the same time. So, but the problem, what we think about this is that what seems to be lacking in robot governance is a backstep mechanism that can coordinate and align robot and regulatory developers. But how to establish really that backstep mechanism and what tools can work to align robot developers and rule makers? We consider that experimentation can be harnessed to optimize the regulatory framework for robotics. First, testing can provide reliable data on hazards and the efficiency of safety measures. And by using the data of a specific test on emerging devices, we can know what are the risks that these technologies create, or how do measures to ensure safety generate novel hazards. Crucially, however, it allows translating abstract codes of conduct into concrete measures. And our research in previous projects, like the Liaison project, pointed out to the difficulties of operationalizing abstract standards into concrete guidance. And not rarely, developers do not know how to turn a standard into a design decision. And furthermore, testing methods, at least for personal care robots, are not that well known into how to apply them in concrete cases. So experimentation may provide that bridge in generating data on what works and what does not work. And it may bring both developers and policymakers closer. And relatedly, experimentation also helps to ground risk assessments. These depend on what counts as a risk, its impact and probability, and empirical data can precisely give us that information. Also, it provides the basis for further replicating the test and deepening into safety hazards. As ISO's technical report in 2020 revealed, the test methods for many personal care robots have not been implemented or evaluated broadly, and in part of the lack of test facilities. That is why EUROBENCH is such a good opportunity in this respect, and hopefully it can lead to the harmonization of these standards. But making those tests replicable and turning them into a source of information for rule makers is part of the potential that we are very much aiming at unlocking. And last but not least, it broadens the scope also of safety. Robots not only present risks that they focus on physical harm, these devices interact with users in multiple ways, and hence presenting the prospect of cognitive damage or psychological aspects that that very much hamper the safety of the user in different ways, and also with other fundamental rights. Think about, for instance, privacy. So regulations not only serve the goal of safety, the physical safety, but safety has many dimensions, not only physical. And as these devices become more interconnected, ubiquitous, and incorporate artificial intelligence, other aspects concerning privacy, discrimination, and even cybersecurity may arise. So the findings that we have from the Liaison project highlight this very much issue, and stress that although each of the standards investigated within the context of the project, which also included the personal care robot standard 13482, is concerned with physical safety requirements, the legislative system includes many other fundamental rights to be protected. And in the line of this thought, insights from the broader community of stakeholders within this context of this project have indicated that standards should shift from mono-impact to multi-impact. However, as current standardization activity has shown, pinpointing these harms remains a tremendous challenge. And in this sense, they should include factors related to ethics, environmental sustainability, liability, accountability, privacy, data protection, psychological aspects, further stressing the very much need of a multidisciplinary and multi-stakeholder approach in crafting policies aimed at framing new technologies. So here's an overview of how broad safety could be, and when it comes to certain technologies as robots. And as you can see from this graph, this is not only a physical dimension, but also includes a cyber dimension, and also encompassing cybersecurity impacts, which adds also elements like trust or over-trust into the picture.
So, propelling practice. Propelling stands for pushing forward robot development for lawmaking, and it fits within European Union's Horizon 2020 initiative, which is funding EUROBENCH, which is a program aiming at setting the first framework for development of benchmark for robotic devices. So what we do on propelling is that we are gathering a multidisciplinary team where we'll be executing EUROBENCH protocols. So what is our main goal? Our goal is to improve not only a specific device, or to see whether a device can fit the law or the legal standards or not, but also to improve the overall regulation for robotics and AI. So what we will do is that we will be using EUROBENCH testing facilities, including its software and database, to assess a combination of indicators and control algorithms. And we will try to reflect with that approach the possibility to harness experimentation as a source of evidence-based knowledge for policy interventions. So what we're doing here is that we are grounding our initial approach, our initial ideas of using experimentation as a bridge between regulation and policy and robot developers, and we are piloting it in a very specific project. So we are focusing on lower limb exoskeletons within the EUROBENCH framework. So we will be using the Tecna 8 exoskeleton, and we are focusing on a very specific standard, which is the ISO 13482, which sets forth the safety requirements for personal care robots, and also includes exoskeletons, even though also encompasses other different devices. So in practice, the project will conduct 2 testing weeks in a testing zone in Madrid. We will conduct 3 experiments with the aim of unearthing 4 aspects. I will just zoom into these aspects later on. And we'll be using different categories of subjects. And this later aspect is key because the ISO standard admits that there is no sufficient numerical data for specific categories of subjects, namely children or pregnant women. So that's the exoskeleton we'll be using in our testing facilities. And these are the issues we are tackling. So the first of them is fear of falling. So fear of falling is a very interesting issue because it's a psychological factor, but also has some physiological aspects and physical reactions. And it's a factor which is key in an elderly population. However, the ISO standard does not include fear of falling as a potential hazard associated with lower limb exoskeletons. And that's a problem. So you're trying to use experimentation to demonstrate or to assess whether fear of falling is an element that is associated with the use of these devices. And so we propose a method to test whether fear of falling is a hazard associated with lower limb exoskeletons in this vein. And what we'll be doing is that we'll be monitoring different users' heart or respiration rates while using the in different conditions. And we'll also be tracking the users while wearing the device and measuring its recovery from those perturbations. And we will correlate this data with specific performance indicators as predictors of the presence of fear of falling. So the object of this set of experimentation is to show to what extent fear of falling is associated with the use of lower limb exoskeletons and to what extent it should be regulated as a specific hazard within the ISO standard. The next issue, I think it's also it's important, is initiating protective steps. And this is because the ISO standards invite manufacturers to define personal care robots halting, but does not include specific guidelines on scenarios where it can be initiated or whether the bottom should be reachable or not. And there is consistent research on the lack of specific guidelines on these aspects. So we are trying to unearth the specificities of initiating protective stops and how it should be initiated. And so we basically suggest executing 2 scenarios, one replicating unstructured environments and the other one characterizing impacts on muscle coordination. And the information we will get from those standards as combined with a questionnaire we will distribute among users will help us to determine to what extent or which should be the guidelines for protective stops. And it also, and this third aspect we think is key, it will provide information on the impact of cyber attacks and faulty features on user safety. And as the cyber aspect and the physical layer gets more closely interrelated, it seems that there are many issues of cybersecurity that may impact on user safety. However, there is a lack of research on how how faulty or malicious actors in the cyber realm can impact user safety. And with testing, with the tests, we're aiming at unearthing those aspects. The third element is instability in collision. So we consider that ISO 13482 does not address instability in collision as a hazard related to lower limb exoskeletons. So it's addressed with relation to other robots, but not specific to lower limb skeletons. And that's a problem because we think that there may be some hazards there that are left aside. So we are aiming at using user stability as an indicator of the capability of different subjects to maintain balance while wearing the device. And data on different ages and genders will suggest also specific standards for distinct categories of subjects. So in a nutshell, what we are doing is that we are using a test bench to provide information for the improvement of a specific regulation. And our findings here will open the door for further testing and further improvement of further regulations. But there are also 2 overarching issues that I think raise many issues, many questions, and are worth scoping better. So the first of them is standardizing experimentation protocols. So there are standards on hazards, there are rules on safety measures, but we consider that the experimentation and verification and validation of specific devices remains under-regulated. And it's normally a question left for technical experts. However, we consider that it's a normative question with that raises interesting normative questions. So it's worth exploring. And we are aiming at also exploring to what extent experimentation protocols can be standardized and to what extent they can be made reliable, but also fair and an adequate source of information. And another aspect which is related to the previous one is that some robots are tested in the wild already. So we see many robots being tested outside in the streets, starting from autonomous vehicles to care robots in hospitals. So, but do we know that the information they provide justify the risks they create? And this is a key question and a key regulatory question, because normally testing generates risks for users or for those that are under tests, and then also generates some restrictions on their legal rights. So to what extent the use of testing justify the risk it creates? And also, what is the necessity of those tests? To what extent do we need to test on users and in the wild? Those are also normative questions that we think we can use the EUROBENCH test facility to unearth or to properly scope, and how the results of one test can be used in another area with another device. And this is key, because if we'll see how exoskeletons are being tested and how safety is being assessed, there are different kinds of tests. There is no agreement or inclusion and exclusion criteria or how to test specific hazards. So we need to standardize these rules so as to make standards reliable, fair, and adequate, and to provide information to to properly apprise how robots should be tested. And that's pretty much it. Thank you very much for your attention. Certainly, this is a project in the making. And so if you want more information, if you have any further questions, if you have any feedback, feel free to contact us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carlos and Eduard, for this very complete overview on different, very challenging aspects. You are pioneers in this. Happy to have you on board in this, in the EUROBENCH, and hopefully also in the future with other projects. There are also some questions for you, and let me introduce the last speaker, which is Alfonso Dominguez. Alfonso is working at Tecnalia. Tecnalia is a partner of EUROBENCH, and Tecnalia is their coordinator of the software part of EUROBENCH. As you know, EUROBENCH is aiming to offer tools to people, not only this testing facility, but also tools that will allow anyone, anywhere, to perform tests in their own labs and compare the performance with other systems. No? And that is the core of your EUROBENCH software. We would like to end this webinar series with this presentation, because it's something that links what all we have said with the future. No, the software will be released now to limited part of this beta tester, which we are involved in, but soon will be, in the next year, will be released to anyone. So this for us, it's a very important step for standardization and benchmarking. So please, Alfonso, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you for the presentation, Diego. Okay, I will comment a little bit about the problem of the reproducibility of the experiments, how it affects the benchmarking of them, how we handle it in EUROBENCH, from the software perspective, harmonizing the algorithms that take part in this platform. Okay, the reproducibility of the experiment has been known to be limited in many scientific files. In a recent survey, in which 1,500 research took part, the 70% of them admitted that they have difficulties when trying to reproduce the experiments proposed by other colleagues. Even the 50% of them recognizes that the issue of reproducibility also affects to their own experiments. If you are familiar with the experimentation, you have been in this situation more than once. You research a little bit, find an algorithm method that solves the issue you have been working on, and you decide to give it a try and try to implement it or run it in order to compare its result with yours. But when getting down to the work, a lot of difficulties arises. Different versions of the implementation languages, the input data they do not have the same format. Even the performance indicators are different, and there is no way to compare them. So this is one of the aims of EUROBENCH, to try to solve this problem, and its aim is to create a framework to test robotics in a systematic way. So researchers or companies could test their development at any stage using the facilities the project is building and the software platform that it is available to design, run, and compare the results of the experiments we are doing. In these presentations, we are focusing in this software. It consists on several protocol description, database with data sets of experiments that are already using these protocols, tools for automatic scoring, and a decision support system. We are going to focus on the harmonization actions we have to apply to the automatic scoring system in order to handle this issue. But to begin, to start, let's start with a little bit of terminology. Everybody can disagree on the terms that I am going to introduce, but the concept behind it is can be captured easily. Okay, when conducting an experiment, you are likely to repeat the experiment several times for different conditions, for different subjects. So for a single run of this experiment, a single execution, you will have a set of data, and probably this data is depends on the brand of the equipment you are using, and even have its proprietary format. So here we propose to convert this data to a preprocessed format that it contains similar information to the previous one, but it is agnostic to the equipment, and it is in an open format. Apart from the information of the equipment, you will probably have some kind of files or database to describe the system you are testing, the subjects that are participating in the experiments, and probably the condition, the specification of the condition in which the experiment has been done. So this is for a single run, but we can run several runs, keeping the human participating, the robot, and the control variables, the condition you are applying. This is normally done for statistical issues. You want to do to have a statistical meaning data, and you repeat the experiment. So the files gets bigger and bigger, and it could be bigger when you decide to change one of the variables of the experiments. For example, if we are testing a protocol in which we are working on a slope with wearing an exoskeleton, we can have the angle of the slope, the length of the slope, even the support that the exoskeleton provides to the user. And if we modify one of these variables, we are changing the condition. In the example in the figure, for example, we are varying the support of the skeletons, and we have three conditions there. And even more files if we decide that we need we are going to test our prototype among different human subjects. So in the end, we have a huge amount of experiment files. One, for example, for describing the robot that it is participating in the experiment. Several for describing the humans, the human metrics, the metrics of the humans that are taking part in the experiments. A few files to describe the specification of the different conditions of the experiments, and then for each of the run, we have several files depending on which kind of information we want to register from the experiment, joint angles, EMG, pressure, whatever. The problem here, the problem or the question to solve is how to score this experiment in a standard way. So we here we have an example of algorithm we can have there in EUROBENCH. We have an algorithm, and it receives some preprocessed files and makes its computations and generates some performance indicators. Here we have two problems. The process of standardization can be complex because we have two main issues. We have a lot of data, as we have said, files for describing the robot, the subjects, the conditions, files in each of the runs for registering all the information we want. And we are designing algorithms coming from different people, from different researchers, engineers that are used to do their programs in the language they are confident in, and well, they want to keep this as it is. Even we have a problem with heterogeneous algorithm language, but even the same language, but with different versions that can interfere each other and make one of the algorithms do not the things that it has to do. So in EUROBENCH, we are approaching this problem in the following way. In order to handle the quantity of data that it is gathered, we are proposing to the algorithms to focus only on a single run. We try to avoid in the algorithms all the loops that have to be with the subject, with the condition, with the run we are running, and this let us simplify these algorithms and even make the aggregation of the data we want externally. We can have in external method or in other more generic algorithm tools to aggregate all the runs across a condition, all the conditions across a subject, or even all the subjects across a robot. Okay, And regarding the other problem we have, we propose the people to encapsulate the algorithms in Docker images that has all that shares a common interface. So all the dependencies are encapsulated in these containers, in these images, and do not interfere each other. And all these Docker images are treated the same way. So I forgot to mention that we are trying the scoring to be an automatic procedure to be done by a computer. So everything has to be specified very well, and all these kind of interfaces, the shared interfaces, helps this automatic computation to be processed. Okay, so we have our starting point is the source code the researchers provide to EUROBENCH, and of this source code it's under tools of version control. We have them in GitHub and GitLab. We take advantage of the continuous integration processes in these tools in order to handle issues like checking linking check of the input-output data in order to for the format to be compliant, in order to generate the Docker images, in order to test the algorithm we have with some reference data. So if some modification is done in the algorithm and you see that the output, the expected output is affected, you see that something you have touched something that has to be corrected, and we also use it to push the images we generate to the Docker Hub. That it is a kind of cloud where you put the data images and you can then get them, and EUROBENCH platform gets them, and a component in it that it is called the PI manager uses uses them, call them as many times as needed, depending on the conditions, the subject that participates in the experiments, and other issues. So to conclude, some messages to take away. One of them is do not try to force the people to use common languages. Let them use the language they are confident, and make use of current modern tools like Docker, Kubernetes, or whatever to encapsulate the code and its dependencies, and focus on providing a common interface, so all of them can be treated the same way, and this is what you propose. Try to keep the algorithms as simple as possible. This is good for maintaining, for if you want to dig into the source code, you will understand. You are going to understand it better, and everything is less subject to errors. Provide this ground truth data. It will serve not only to test the algorithms you are downloading, but if you do modifications on it, it will allow you to verify that everything is as it was, and you don't have touched anything important. And for sure, document everything, how to install it, how to use it, and other kind of things you consider that it is good to know for other people to use your algorithm. And here are some references that are available to the people. I will go to the Explorer in order to show them. Here, for example, we have the documentation of the pre-processed data we are using. How do we expect the algorithms to provide the results? What is the human model we are using? Which is the minimum information we are expecting for a protocol to be used in EUROBENCH. There we have a GitHub repository in order to contain the algorithms that are going to be included in the platform. Here we have one that it is used in the experiment. I have told the one working on the slope. There's some kind documentation about installation, usage, how to generate the Docker images. The final algorithm is in the Docker Hub, so it is available to anyone, and in concrete to EUROBENCH platform when we are using it. If I look for it, so here we have, here we can retrieve information about the description, the performance indicators that are calculated, the testbed, what equipments are necessary to put everything on, the steps you have to follow in experiment to follow this protocol. And if you like the protocol, you want to do your own experiment, there is a way to unlock the information and then compare it with other protocols using the other protocols, other experiments using the same protocols. Okay, so that has been all. So thank you for your attention. I'm looking for questions in the roundtable.
Thank you very much, Alfonso. Okay, we actually ran out of time. We had several speakers. Already part of the roundtable discussion is being running in parallel in the chat. We already suggested, since we don't have time now for this live roundtable because the time is ended, to write your answer here or write us your answer directly to us, our organizer, and then we will put in the website question answer, so you can all look at all the questions. And also some of you speakers have also put your email address, so people can also directly write to you. It's a pity we cannot make it, but I think it's all the presentation were very, very interesting and focused. Please let us also know if you can share your presentation. Of course, we will share the recording, but also if you can, just tell us. We don't want to know that some information could be some kind of confidential, let's say, materials. No? So thank you very much for your participation. Actually, this webinar series has been come to an end, and we hope we can do other version in the future, because I think this has gathered pretty good attention from the community. And thanks to Jan for the collaboration with the cost that organized this, and also all the speakers of all these webinars, and also all the participants. So thank you very much. I don't know, Jan, if you want to say any final word on all this.
Well, just that I agree with you, and I would like to thank very much the presenters for a great overview of the wide range of, well, let's say from trying to deal with regulations and standards and to the process of improving standards and testing methods and sharing data, I think was great overview. So yeah, and I would also like to thank you, Diego, of course, for your support in organizing this, and also Garbine for driving it. Yeah, and yeah, thanks a lot.
So that, keep in touch and stay tuned, because new projects and new development will come. Thank you. Have a nice day.